So the topic is bipolar disorder, but of course the topic is always mental well-being, really, and how we access what's inside of us and can never be broken and can never be scratched and can never we're not lacking. Nobody is lacking, and so I don't know if people got the thing to have a pencil and paper. But I'm going to ask you to, on the pencil and paper, to divide it up from up and down about 2/3 of the way down. Do a horizontal line to separate the top 2/3 from the bottom 2/3, and then I'm going to, in the top 2/3, I'm going to have you make three columns. Actually, leave room for a fourth because I'll just talk about the fourth. But the first column you could put mood, and leave room for. We're going to have three things under each one, and the next one you're going to have tension, and you're going to have 3 different spaces for 3 different things. And then the third one, you're going to have the physical. The Greek root, of course, is soma. That's why they call it somatic or psychosomatic medicine, mind-body medicine, physical. And then below the line, there's just going to be 4 different things. If in that bottom third you could leave room to put the following, a high level, or you could put the word dis-ease, dis-ease. It's kind of a play on the words disease, and put 3 big pluses going up, that it's really high. Because the things below that thing of the dis-ease are going to be emergency responses to try to save the person from having to take their life. And but I'm going to ask you on the back side of that paper, unless you have another paper, I'm going to have you just list. I don't think this will take too long. I think I'm going to have you list 13 items. 1 is depression. 2 is anger, anger and irritability. 3 is mania. 4 is anxiety. 5 is physical symptoms. They have somatic symptoms, but physical symptoms. 6 is suicidal ideation. 7 is psychosis, meaning you lose touch with reality as people normally know it. 8 is sleep problems. Am I going too fast? Am I going too fast to anybody?
No, that's fine. That's fine.
Okay. 9 is memory problems, memory. 10, what it has here is repetitive thoughts and behaviors. You can either put that or you can put OCD, obsessive thoughts and then compulsive behaviors, OCD. And 11 is dissociation. Dissociation. And 12, they have personality functioning, but when they describe it, they talk about lack of, so I'm going to have you put purpose and connection in number 12. Do people have purpose and connection? And then number 13 is substance use or substance abuse. So those 13 things there are the things that are measured. And if anybody ever wants to get a free one, I'm just going to show you the picture. There, you can write down, if you want get one free, you can just go online and come anything close to this. If you put DSM-5 self-rated level 1 cross-cutting symptom measure, DSM-5 self-rated level 1 cross-cutting symptom measure. You'll find they're free. They're free. You'll find adult and you'll find child 11 to 17. And it's something like this. And you can see that it goes between a blue and a white. And that's because there's 25 questions that address the 13 items that I showed you, that had you list. So I'm just going to give an example. Like the first one is depression. It says, have you had little interest or pleasure in doing things? Do you feel down, depressed, or hopeless is the number 2. And then people score from 0 to 4. 0 is none at all. 1 is slight, rare, or less than a day or two. This is in 2-week period. Mild, number 2 is mild, several days. Number 3 is moderate, more than half the days. And 4 is severe, nearly every day. So 0, 1, 2, 3, or 4. None, slight, mild, more than half the days, moderate, and severe. So I give that to people. I have them when I'm doing my telepsychiatry. The people fill this out, and it gives me a broad sense of how much what people's level of consciousness is, and how much distress and dis-ease they're having. And I was teaching a course with my wife, Dr. Linda, at a university on diagnoses. And I woke up one morning and I suddenly realized that those 13 things that I gave you, that they're not disconnected. That I saw them in 3 rows of 3 and then 4 down below. And I'm going to show you what I saw. So I saw in the mood one, I think you can see this. On the mood one, I saw people, when you get caught up in stressful thinking. By the way, my daughter, Maggie, and I'm going to take this away from it. My daughter, Maggie, is a dispatcher for 911. Did I mention that last week, Elizabeth? She's a 911 dispatcher, and I think because of her knowledge and understanding of the principles, I think she's a very, very good one. She remains calm, and she really helps people that are not calm, that are calling. But I saw one of the chapters in one of the books that I'm going to write. I keep talking about these, but they're forming, thanks to Elizabeth's help, assistance here with transcripts and stuff, is head of one chapter is going to be 911, and in the UK it's 999, right? It's for emergencies only. When we get caught up in stressful thinking, we activate the stress response in our body that has a big sign on it, for emergencies only. Only a lady that I saw yesterday admitted that she was activating that with stressful thinking 19.5 to 20 hours a day, where it's meant to be activated once every 24 to 72 hours for up to 30 minutes. After that, it causes physiological and psychological havoc. So and the next thing I'll say is that psychiatric symptoms, another chapter is going to be misunderstood gifts. I'm going to say that again. Psychiatric symptoms, misunderstood gifts. It is a gift to us that we feel pain when we put our hand on a hot stove, because we pull it away and limit the damage, the tissue damage to our hand. Can I see a few nods on that? Does that make sense? So having pain receptors is a gift. It's an incredibly beautiful gift. We have been given similar receptors in our mood, in our level of tension, and in our physical body. If we start activating the stress response, and we won't go through all the chemical things that happen that in, I think, lecture number 4 are delineated. Here's what happens to our mood. At first, we get depression. Our mood starts going down. At the beginning, as our mood goes down, if we don't hear that signal, we can have our mood down and still be nice to people. But if it goes down further, it's not that you go from one to the other. You take each one of these with you. if you keep getting more and more down mood with your paying attention to negative thinking, now not only do you have a down mood, but you find yourself irritable and angry. And if you do that long enough, you will eventually feel disconnected and lost, and no sense of purpose. Now those, I'm going to, on your thing of 13 that I gave you earlier, I want you to then cross off or put a line through that we've taken care of 3 of those: depression, anger and irritability, and disconnectedness. Is everybody with me? If I'm going too fast, just unmute. So now let's go to tension. Again, these are misunderstood gifts that we've been given to try to wake us up to that we're innocently doing something with our thinking. And if we don't know how to do it differently, at least if we know that we're doing this, we can go try to find somebody. If I have a plumbing problem, believe me, I don't try to fix it. Or I would have more water in my house everywhere. I go to try to find somebody that knows about plumbing. Or electrical, I certainly don't, because I know you can die very quickly. So here's tension. The first one is we feel anxiety. Now we all know there's layers of anxiety. Hopefully we even notice that we're just feeling a little tense. You know that story about the fellow that went to the psychiatrist and he said, I have this problem. Sometimes I have a feeling that I'm a wigwam. And other times I have the feeling that I am a, oh, now I blew it here. A wigwam and sometimes I feel I'm a wigwam and sometimes I feel like I'm a teepee. And the psychiatrist says, well, I know your problem. And he said, what's that? He says, you're too tense. Never mind. That's pretty bad, isn't it? What?
That is terrible.
I know it's terrible. That's okay. It's okay. Remember, life is too important to take seriously. Okay, so it's too tense. Yeah. Anyway, so you get anxious, and this, if you stay in this, you create enough dysfunction that you start triggering the locus coeruleus. We've said injects norepinephrine in our body and tries to wake us up with a panic attack. It's the rumble strip on the side of the road trying to wake us up. If we still continue, we'll start having phobias. People have phobias of things. They try to isolate it. And then they start to have rituals. They start to find rituals, obsessive thoughts and obsessive behaviors to try to lower the anxiety that they're having, that they're innocently creating with their thinking. They have to keep arranging things or counting. The 3 most common are counting, checking, washing, hand washing. So, people count to 100, 500 times a day, or they count to 10, 3,000 times a day. And then eventually it gets so overwhelming, the anxiety, that people dissociate. At the extreme, they dissociate into actually separate personalities. But the dissociation before that can be that they lose periods of time during the day. Suddenly it's 3 o'clock and the last time they remember it was 12:30, and they're in a different room or in extremes in a different building than they were before. They have no idea how they got there. So now you can knock those 3 things off of their 13. Anxiety, OCD, and dissociation. Those were 3 of your obsessive thoughts and repetitive thoughts and behaviors, number 10, and anxiety was number 4, and the dissociation was number 11. So we got 6 down. If we keep doing this, as soon as we start activating physical symptoms, we start having pain somewhere. And it's showing that the inflammatory response, both in the bowel and in the brain, lessens the tolerance for pain. People start having pain at a level where nobody else would have pain. So you get things like fibromyalgia. You get people that have tremendous problems with any hormonal shifts in their bodies, that they have tremendous increase in their perception of pain. And it's kind of a wake-up call. I saw a 16-year-old girl yesterday who was cutting and thinking about suicide. But one of the first things that happened when she got stressed was she started having migraines every morning for the last 18 months. Then your sleep disturbance. You usually at the beginning, you have trouble sleeping and staying asleep. Later on, as it continues, sometimes all you can do is sleep, because if you're sleeping 20 hours a day, you're not damaging yourself with negative thinking. And then eventually you get so stressed that you start forgetting things. You look like somebody with severe ADHD, even if you don't have it. You're misplacing your keys. You're leaving your lights on in your car. Now they have alarms. I used to do that when I would stress myself. I would leave my lights on and come out after a 12-hour workday in the hospital and seeing patients, and I'd have a dead battery. But we get so stressed. So you can knock 3 more things off. You can knock physical pain, sleep disturbances, and memory. So those are the 9 that are above. And what I usually put there where you have increased disease is that an innocent lack of understanding of the 3 principles, innocent lack of understanding of the universal principles of mind, thought, and consciousness. And with that, a lack of understanding of the spiritual nature of life, that we're all connected to the same energy and all a manifestation of the same energy. And also that our experience is not created from the outside in, it's moment to moment created by our use of mind, thought, and consciousness from the inside out. Now, when people start experiencing so much dis-ease, oftentimes one of the first things they go to is what we covered last week. They go to substance abuses, alcohol, opiates, marijuana, less seriously most of the time. They go to something to make them feel better. The FDA, the Federal Drug Association in the United States, has actually approved the use of ecstasy for PTSD treatment. Why? Because it dissociates people from their thinking. Now, the one we're going to do next is mania, and I'm going to suggest, and then we're going to later do psychosis and suicidal ideation. I'm even saying to you that suicidal ideation, suicidal thoughts are your friends. They're telling you that you're nearing the cliff and you've been using your thinking innocently, in such a way that you've lowered your mood, you've raised your tension, you've created physical symptoms such that life is becoming unbearable and you've lost hope that it can ever get better. So with that, we're going to talk about mania and why, and I'm going to tell you why and explain why I have that separate from depression and bipolar disorder. Okay, if we go forward. Okay, so what are the public misconceptions? Should I see if there's any questions about what I just said?
I mean, the question, and it might have been because I was dealing with something technical, but the question I've got right now is, did you make a suggestion that there was something around our thinking that creates all of these things? The mood, not gone there yet.
If I didn't, it's our thinking that when we pay attention to low mood thinking, when we don't know that our brain is just a computer and our mind is spiritual and that our mind has charge of our brain, and that we have a free will and have the free will to pay attention to whatever thoughts we want to pay attention to, and that if we don't pay attention to the low mood thoughts, we don't have to do anything else, but as best as we can limit our attention, that our innate inborn mental well-being will rise to the surface and fill us up. That's why my classic story of the lady in her 50s that says that she's full of depression and anxiety, but then her grandchildren come over and make her happy for 2 hours. And I tell her that's not fair to blame your grandchildren. It's not their fault that you're happy then. Because all that's happening is that you're lessening your attention on your negative thoughts, and you're getting present in your life. And as soon as you do that, it opens the valve that fills you up with the happiness and joy that's inside of you. But if people don't know to do that and they get a cycle of chronic mental stress, they activate the stress response in our body, and all of these things that I told you about are alarms that keep getting louder and louder and louder, trying to wake the person up that they need to find somebody. If they don't know what to do, they need to find somebody that has expertise in how the mind works and what life is, so that they can stop doing this to themselves. It's not about blaming ourselves. It's about seeing our innocence, but also having enough awareness to know that we need help. You know, my friend George Pransky, who has probably along with me a quirky sense of humor, he sadly says, and he doesn't mean to be a smart when he says this, he says, sadly, for some people, death is an early warning sign. It's not an early warning sign, but if I don't hear any of the others, it's the first one that gets my attention. And we're trying to help people realize that even these psychiatric symptoms, let alone our physical symptoms, they are gifts. They are gifts letting us know that we've gotten off the main track of love and understanding and joy. And there's no should to that. It's just that I haven't met the person yet that doesn't want to live in lighthearted love and joy. So what are the public misconceptions regarding bipolar disorder? What used to be called manic depressive disorder. I can't tell you how many people I've seen over the last 40 years that came in and said, well, my family, they keep telling me I've got bipolar disorder. And I said, well, why is that? And they said, well, because one minute I'm happy and the next minute I'm angry. One minute I'm joyful and the next minute I'm upset and I'm throwing things and yelling. And they say, you must have bipolar disorder. Well, that's not the criteria, even that the DSM-5 or the ICD-10. All that was Bill Pettit years ago, who didn't know that he didn't have to live in every thought that my computer brain spit out. So I was it was like my brain had a ring through my nose, and it just jerked me around with every thought. If things were going my way, I was happy. When things stopped going my way and the earth didn't realize that its main purpose was meeting all my needs, I got unhappy and upset. And so I went up and down with like a roller coaster with my thinking. And that's all that is. So now I'm going to talk about the diagnoses that the criteria has in the DSM-5, just so you kind of know what we're talking about. But I will reiterate, even before I say that their misconception is that it's a separate thing, and they don't see that as our picture of our going down, 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 that it's really hypomania and mania and severe depression is connected. It's a continuum. It's far along the continuum of somebody that's gotten stuck in a chronic state of attention to low mood thinking. And it's a louder and louder gift, a louder and louder alarm that's trying to wake us up. And it's also an alarm if universal mind is always coming through us. But it's limited in our ability, our level of understanding. So sometimes the best that universal mind can do, this is my way of seeing it, the best it can do is to do something that keeps us alive. That at least keeps us alive and gives us another chance that we might get help, see something, that we might be open to seeing something. this is tangential, and it's not a silly joke like the one about the two tents, but there is a YouTube thing, or when the elephants came to dinner. Does anybody seen it? If you have, raise your hand. Did somebody? No, nobody's raised their hand. Well, it's worth going on your YouTube. It's 4 or 5 minutes, and it's called When the Elephants Came to Dinner. And the reason I'm saying it, because I see universal mind more and more. It's one thing to say that it's the universal mind, or what I call God, is the intelligent energy of all things, in form or formless. And its form in nature is not only in the soil and the plants, but in animals. And this story, that when the elephants came to dinner, I think it's Zimbabwe, they built a hotel unknowingly on a path that the elephants have to go get the mango trees when they ripen in the spring. And they made this hotel right in the path. Well, the elephants are still guided by universal mind. They know where the mango trees are. So every spring, this huge herd of elephants come right through the lobby of this hotel in Zimbabwe to get to the mango trees. They don't bother anybody. They don't destroy anything. They don't do any damage. They go out and eat the mangoes. And one of them, the mother has this 2-week-old elephant, this baby little girl elephant, 2 weeks old, and she follows through. And at one time, they're coming back out for a little while, and the baby elephant gets tired, so it lays down in the lobby to take a nap, and all the elephants do not move for I don't know how long it was until the baby elephant wakes up. They stop. They just stop. And we'll go forward. We're no hurry. We'll go forward when baby wakes up. Now, I don't know. To me, that's powerful. It's a spiritual experience of watching that. That universal mind is indeed everywhere. When I was a kid, they said God. They tried to tell me God is everywhere, and I said, how in the hell can that be? I get it now. God is everywhere because he's everything. Anyway, including us. So here's the criteria. Here's the criteria, just so you know. And they call there's bipolar 1, there's bipolar 2, and there's cyclothymia. And I'm not gonna, like, you're not psychiatric residents, but I just want you to. I'm just gonna kind of give you an overview. Bipolar 1 is somebody that has had a manic episode, and I'll give you the criteria. You don't even have to have a depressive episode to have bipolar 1. You just had to have had a manic episode that met manic criteria. Bipolar 2, you have to have had both a major depressive episode and at least one hypomanic episode. And I'm going to go through the criteria briefly. The only difference between hypomania and mania is that one lasts at least 7 days and the other one lasts at least 4 days. Hypomania only lasts at least 4 days. The mania is 7 days, or if you have to require hospitalization, even if it's only been 2 or 3 days and you've been setting fires in the middle of the street or running around naked or handing out $100 bills on the corner and you end up in the hospital, then that is you can see it's all made up. And cyclothymia is 2 years for adults and children 1 year, where you've had hypomanic-like symptoms and depressive symptoms, but you've never met full criteria of any of them. So what are the criteria? Well, I will read a manic episode is a distinct period, this is what's important, of abnormally and persistently elevated, expansive, or irritable mood, and abnormally persistently increased goal-directed activity or energy lasting at least 1 week, most of the day, nearly every day. During this, people often have 3 of the next 7, I think. Inflated self-esteem or grandiosity. People often think they have special powers. It can cause their death. People have even tried to fly, or or less dangerously, they'll start calling the president of the United States, or they'll call they think they've got something that's going to solve the world's problems. You know, like people with three principles knowledge, you know, like us. But anyway, they're more talkative than usual, or they have the pressure to keep talking. They get increased distractible, increased in goal activity. People oftentimes do things sexually that they would not normally do, totally out of character. They get excessive movement. So that's mania. And hypomania is just that it only lasts. Oh, and they don't sleep. You sleep less than 3 hours a day, but they have lots of energy. They're still going. People sometimes will be up 60 hours at a time, with not on drugs or caffeine or anything else. So why is this important? Age of onset for bipolar is at about 18. Bipolar 2, it's about in the early 20s. 90% of the people have another episode. 60% of the people have manic episodes before they have a depressive episode. What I'm suggesting to you, and I'm going to show it in my stories later, is that hypomania is the mind's way of trying to keep the person alive. When I started realizing this about 2 years ago, I started asking anybody that's ever had a hypomanic episode if they ever remembered what thoughts they were having, the last thoughts they remember having before they went into this hyper state. And I was surprised that about 75% of the people said, yes, I remember. And I said, what were the thoughts? And they said, I remember that I was ready to take my life. I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't, like the cat, I couldn't hold on to the branch anymore. And I was starting to make plans to take my life. One man that I'll give the example in a little bit here, the last thing he remembered, because he felt he had failed his family economically, the last thing he remembered was that he was going to kill his wife, his children, his 2 boys that he loved, and then himself, out of love, because he didn't want them to suffer like he was suffering. That was before he went into a full-blown manic episode. Why is it serious? Why do I think that this is connected to, it's not just a different entity, it's just on the spectrum of people getting further down to whether they're seeing either substance abuse, going psychotic to another world, killing themselves, or becoming manic as a way to try to stay alive. The suicide risk for bipolar disorder, for bipolar disorders 1 and 2, the rate of suicide is 15 times, 1,500 times percent higher than the general population. In fact, bipolar disorders account for 25% of all suicides, 1/4 of all suicides. 75, why do I think it's on a spectrum? Tell me, 75% have clear anxiety disorders, panic attacks, generalized anxiety disorder, social anxiety, phobias, before their bipolar disorder comes to be. Over 50%, those are internal. Remember, we have internalizing disorders, what I'm experiencing. Well, then they also, over 50% of them have an externalizing, either intermittent explosive disorder where they have to blow off the energy. They have conduct disorder, they have substance use disorder, they have some external thing. And then in the body, metabolic syndrome and migraines are very, very common, much more common than the general population, where they get high blood pressure, they get type 2 diabetes, they get excessive weight gain, they get migraine headaches. Over 50% have alcoholism problems. Over 50% of people with bipolar disorder. Some people question whether that's, again, whether they're trying to lessen their pain, and they're sometimes, even when they get hypomanic, they use the alcohol to try to slow down. It's interesting that 10 to 20% of people that have childbirth, 10 to 20% of them go through a hypomania early in the postpartum period. Probably a defense against feeling overwhelmed, totally overwhelmed. And I guess, of course, it may protect them from lowering the rates of suicide that happens in postpartum depression and in infanticide, where the children actually get killed. These are all just figures, but just so you know. Now, again, because of the chronic inflammation that occurs in the body at all levels, people with bipolar disorder, women and men, die approximately 9 years earlier than their peers, 8.5 to 10 years earlier than their peers, because of all the inflammatory stuff that we talked about in lecture number 4. So I think I've talked about the problem long enough. I'd like to talk more now about some stories of hope. But again, I'm glad to take a question if anybody has one before we do that. I hope it was useful to do this. I don't know, to just so at least we know what we're talking about.
I don't have a question, Bill, but what strikes me, I've had a number of friends who've been through school to become, clinical psychologists, and they always said when you study, you start to get paranoid that you're everything you read, and just you listing those off, you can see the fluctuation of human experience. You can see why people go, oh yeah, I can recognize that. Oh, I can recognize that. But how easily people must worry about themselves. Just I kind of really understand that comment now.
Well, and if people instead start seeing those as gifts, it changes everything, Lila. If they start seeing the symptoms as the gifts that are trying to let them know that they're starting to go off track. I can look back to one time that I think for when I was after my divorce from my wife, before we got back together, and feeling like I'd failed in life. I remember going through a period that I probably was a little bit hypomanic. I didn't do anything destructive or anything, but I think it was a way of defend. It probably lasted for a week or 10 days. It was probably a way of mind trying to give me a chance to get my bearings and not go into a death spiral, if you will. So yeah, but the key is to start to realize that these symptoms are alarm systems that are going off. They're trying to let us know to leave our thinking alone. Leave our thinking alone. Here we have somebody from Joe. I have a question or reflection. Do you have that, Elizabeth, from Joe?
Yep. She's saying, I was diagnosed with bipolar when I was 22 and now have now given up the label. I have the symptoms still, but a lot less severe. I think mine is partly learned patterns from my past trauma and PTSD. I also have chronic migraine headaches.
Yeah. And all I would say to this person, Joe, is that continue your journey of understanding the principles. Because to the degree that you have symptoms, it's not from something that happened 30 years ago. It's from something you're doing daily with your thinking, with these gifts, about what happened 30 years ago. It's your level of understanding about that that's not allowed you to realize that something that happened 30 years ago has absolutely no power over you. And that's not a should, that's not a anything, it's innocent, but that you are obviously going in the right direction, that your symptoms are becoming less and less. It shows that you're going in the right direction. And as to me, this is not about working harder. It's just about, as Sid said, look for beautiful feelings, listen for wisdom, and look for beautiful feelings. And if you continue your journey of understanding the principles, it's just going to get better and better. And also, as Sid was one to say, don't try to get better than you are. And that sounds like a paradox, but what he meant was, and then he would say, if you have gratitude and satisfied with where you are, with gratitude and contentment with where you are, it will take you forward from where you are 100% of the time. But if you're still in that sense of, I'll be happy when, I'll be happy when, I'll be happy when, then that's impeding your progress. I think those of you that have heard, I read it yesterday for something else, but those of you, I don't think I read it last week. It's one of the poems from my late wife Sue's book is called The Last Illusion. And it's very short. I didn't read that, have I, Elizabeth?
No, not that I know of.
It's very short. The last illusion, one last thing I think I need to end confusion. The last illusion, it holds promises of all I want in such profusion. The last illusion, a fickle thing that changes with thought's convolution. The last illusion. But if we can come to have gratitude for where we are and contentment, that feeling that it releases from the inside will always carry us forward. And again, direction is the key. It's not about speed. It's better to be going 3 miles an hour in the direction you want to go than 80 miles an hour in the opposite direction. So let me, here's interesting. The conversion from depression into bipolar disorder, which I'm saying is a worsening of the person is starting to lose their grip on even living with depression. It's interesting. The things that affected the rate after 10 years, there's a 13% conversion from depression to bipolar disorder. Here's the ones that are more likely to convert. People that have been treatment resistant to medications. Okay, they've created more dysregulation than the medications can clean up. Chronic depression, they've been doing it for a long time. Age of onset, they've been doing it since they were young. The number of depressive episodes where they've really gotten all the way down. Chronic depression and the depression severity. And if a person has gotten so depressed that they lost contact with reality temporarily and became psychotic, all of those, as you can see, are just signs that the person has become more and more, they haven't been able to listen to the signals, and they've gotten a lot more and more lost in their attention to their negative thinking. So, and as I read this about the pro-inflammatory state that occurs in a bipolar, they gave examples that the inflammatory state, when we originally have it in the first 30 minutes of the stress response, really helps us. After that, it attacks the GI system. You get ulcerative colitis, Crohn's disease, celiac disease. It attacks the joints. You get rheumatoid arthritis. It attacks the heart. You get interleukin. You get chronic inflammation. You get clots. You get heart attacks. You get strokes. You get cancers, lung, cervix, esophagus, colon, stomach have all been from hyperinflammation. Sleep, infections, asthma. Get much worse, common obstructive pulmonary disease, bone loss, psoriasis, skin diseases. This is all from increased inflammation. And we're human beings. We probably all have some of those things, but if we can see them as alarms and the things that let us know that there's more for us to learn, then we enjoy our life, but we also open to seeing deeper,
So can you tell us some stories you've heard where you've seen some real shift in some of these symptoms?
Absolutely. So I'm going to go first with the man that I talked about, because I met him on a Sunday. He was fully psychotic. He was totally manic. He was going 280 miles an hour. He was delusional. He was telling me he saw the devil in me, and I'm trying to do the history and the physical exam, which I would do, and he was just talking, and it finds out that he had been hypomanic and for almost 3.5 weeks, and then it got to be where he hadn't slept for 60 hours, and finally they got him to help. And I talked with my friend Clytie Mills the other day, because the widow of Dr. Roger Mills, and she remembers she was the nurse that was on duty that weekend with me and from my staff. And we walked in the next morning. I started him on some Haldol and probably some lithium, I don't know, but maybe initially just some Haldol, 5 milligrams 4 times a day. And he was awake the whole night, even with a couple of doses of the medicine. And we walked in and he was still going really high. And some of you have heard me say this. They'd had him ripping up magazines all night long. So the magazines were literally up above his knees. And I got tickled by thoughts that come through my head sometimes. I probably share some that I shouldn't share. But that time I said something silly, like I said, "Man," I said, "Joe, it looks like you've been doing some really heavy reading." Well, he got tickled by that. It hit that place of health. And then I said something about the principles about thought, and I don't know what I said. You wished you had somebody that had been keeping, recording it, because suddenly right in front of my eyes, this man that had been in an incredible psychotic state, awake for 60 hours, going 300 miles an hour, he stopped. And he looked at me and he said, "That really makes sense, doctor, what you just said." And I wasn't sure what to do. And we started talking. And so I know some of you have heard me tell this story, because and I want to tell the other ones, but so we walked out of the room, Clytie and myself and this little nurse from the unit who had worked there for 28 years. Remember, her name was Grace, and she was kind of short and stocky, and she had these beautiful freckles and this auburn hair. And so we walked into the room next door, and she said, "What the hell just happened in there?" And I said, "Well, Grace, I think that he came out of his mania, and I think he's fine now." "Oh, that's impossible," she says. "That's impossible." And I said, "Well, I don't know. We had a pretty good discussion the last 10 minutes I was in there, maybe 15. It seemed like he was fine." "Well, must be a flight into health." I said, "Well, I don't know. He seemed pretty fine." So I said, "I tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to stop his medicines." And some of you have heard me say, she said, "You can't do that." I bit my tongue and tried not to be smart but I finally said something gently. The last time I looked at my degree, that it allowed me to stop and start medicines, and I was going to stop his medicines. And I would leave an as needed medicine, and I said this gently because it sounds kind of big, but I did. But I said, I made it clear to Grace that I didn't want that medicine being given to the patient because she needed it, or the nurse following her needed it, but only to be given if he needed it because of his behavior or his symptoms. Well, I got through to Grace because he got none all day on her shift. I came in the next morning, and the evening shift, of course, who had not seen the dramatic change, she gave him 1 dose. And on Wednesday, that was Monday. He came in on a Sunday. Monday was the morning it happened. Tuesday morning I came in, he was fine, but I'd never seen this before in my life. I was seeing something for the first time. Wednesday, he was fine. Wednesday evening, I had to go back to the hospital to do an emergency consult, and I was told that his family was there from up in Massachusetts, or in Northeast, we'll say, New Hampshire, Vermont, somewhere like that. And so I went down, and his daughter, 28-year-old daughter, told me that I said, your father wants to go home. She said, "Doctor, I've spent 4 hours with him today. He's in a healthier mental state than I've known him in his entire life. Something profound has happened." I discharged him. I didn't have him on any medicines. I gave him a few pills if he had symptoms to call me. And of course, we didn't have cell phones. I saw him on Friday. And again, some of you have probably heard this story. He came in on Friday at 3:00. He looked wonderful. His wife looked like crap. And I said to him, "You look great." He said, "I'm feeling great. I've slept like a baby." He was on no medicines. I said, "But what about all those thoughts about your money and stuff that you were having. He said, well, two things have happened. One, as my mind is quieted down and I quit thinking about the problem, I've already seen two solutions. We're going to be fine financially. And they were right in front of my nose all the time, but I focused so much on the problem that I couldn't see them. I said, what about sleeping? I said, don't you still have a lot of worrisome thoughts at bedtime? He said, well, I do. I said, well, what do you do with them? Well, he said, I count them. I said, you count them? He said, hell, they're as good as sheep. I don't need to count sheep. I can count my thoughts, even my upsetting ones. And he said, I'm sleeping. And he looked great. So I looked at his wife and I said, how are you doing, Beverly? She said, terrible. I haven't slept in 48 hours since Joe came home. I said, well, come. She said, well, I'm worrying about Joe. I said, what are you worried about? She said, all my friends tell me and everything I've read, I'm worrying that he got well too fast and that he's going to get sick again. And I said, well, what would you be doing if he was still in the hospital, Beverly? She said, well, I'd probably be worrying that he wasn't getting well fast enough. Well, I don't know about you. I laughed. I just impulsively laughed. And she got really angry at me. And she said, Dr. Pettit, I love my husband. And I said, I know you love your husband. But I said, I'm not I'm laughing at what we do. I said, I think that comes from the assumption that loving your husband means you have to worry, and it doesn't. Worry has 0.0 to do with love. It has to do with insecurity and fear. How can you say that? She says. I said, well, love to me means having a light, joyful heart available to the people in my life. That's what love means to me. It means having a light, joyful, and loving heart available to the people in my life, whether it's my family, whether it's the person that takes my money at the grocery store, wherever, my employees, my co-workers, wherever. But if I get caught up in worry, that lightheartedness and that joy is the first thing that goes. And then my ability to see beyond the problem to the solution goes. And then my ability to sleep through the night goes. And before you know it, I've become part of the problem and not part of the solution. Well, long story short, he and his wife came to 8 group sessions that I did, and I probably saw him once more individually, and they were fine. Second one, some of you have heard this one, and others haven't. Molly was and Elizabeth. If anybody wants the story of Molly, I think I don't know if I've sent it to you or not. It's called Never Broken, Not So Broken, but I can send it to you. Her own testimony of this. She was in her 5th psychotic admission in 7 months. She was 26 years old. She was a delightful little gal. She had a college degree in psychology. She was married. She had a little 6-year-old boy, but she'd gotten into a manic state and she'd done things that had put her marriage in peril and eventually actually cost the marriage. But she was right now, when I saw her, I was making rounds with the residents at West Virginia University Hospital and a psychiatric unit, and she was in a full-blown manic state. She had not slept for 40 hours. She was on 800 milligrams of Seroquel, which is the maximum dose. She was on 2,100 milligrams of lithium, and she was still not sleeping and talking about 300 miles an hour. Making gibberish. When I listened to her, there was no way I could understand what she was saying. I asked her if she could stop for 60 seconds to let me say something. I said, nod if you think you can do that. I said, I know it's hard. She held up her hand, she nodded. I said, hold up your hand when you're ready to not talk for 60 seconds and just give me a chance to say something. She held up her hand and I very quickly said, Molly, you are perfectly mentally healthy. You just don't know it. You've gotten caught up in some upsetting thinking that has not only dysregulated your chemistry and activated the stress response. After 30 minutes of doing that, you started turning off the healthy genes and started backup genes, so that now you've even affected the gene that has what you want to convey come out as gibberish. But you are perfectly mentally healthy. It has nothing to do with who you are. This is where you are. It's not who you are. We get our little books out and we take all your symptoms down and we put a label on you and we say bipolar 1 with psychotic features, and it has nothing to do with who you are. You are perfectly mentally healthy. Okay? Fast forward 6 months later because of time, and I'm presenting her to the grand rounds in front of the chairman of the psychiatry department of West Virginia University, where they're having me come back to do grand rounds in February. After 10 years, they've decided maybe I was onto something, right? But I'm doing grand rounds there, and she's sitting next to me, and she tells her story and her story of me coming, and she had told the story about me sitting there and her in fully psychotic and me telling her that she was perfectly mentally healthy, and the healing. She talked how the healing began that day, that moment. And so one of the residents said, well, that's fine, and she was now in a fast track getting her RN degree. She's a nurse at the University Hospital, the last I knew, in West Virginia. And the resident asked her, he said, what did you think when Dr. Pettit said you were completely mentally healthy? And she said, the first thing I thought was, oh my God, they've given me a psychiatrist that's crazier than I am. Oh, that's what her thought was, which is really pretty incredible when you think about it. As psychotic it is, as she was, that she could see that what I was saying in the world of psychiatry was totally crazy. But she said, that thought came from my intellect. I know that now, but right behind it came another thought from another place. And I knew that what he had just said was absolutely true. And that's when the healing began. Third story. And this story, if you go online and you Google on YouTube, Stories of Hope, Dr. William Pettit or Dr. Bill Pettit, you will find a series of 4 people that keep giving little snippets. It lasts about 20 minutes, but they keep going for a minute or so. And one of them is a lady who had been to the state hospital, had multiple episodes of severe depression and mania. And she came to me, her mother heard about what things were happening, people that were coming to see me. And she was in her mid-20s, I suppose, or late 20s, early 30s, maybe early 30s. And she, somewhere during the session, she said, you don't understand, Dr. Pettit. She said, you don't understand. I've got a serious mental illness. I'm not going to get better. I can't get better. I've got bipolar disorder. And she says in this interview, I think I would hope that I was more gentle, than I might have said, well, Brenda, it is going to be hard for you to get better if you continue to have that attitude or that belief. But what she says on the thing, you'll get it. She says, he said, well, you're right, not with that attitude. And she started listening, and she was on about 1,500 milligrams of lithium that had held her together, sort of, except when she had things in her life that overwhelmed her. And as she learned the principles, what started to happen was that 1,500 milligrams of lithium became a foreign body to her body, because now the balance was coming from inside. And so progressively, to make a long story short, I'm aware of the time, we had to literally stop all the lithium, because even on a 150 milligram tablet, she would get nauseated, get tremors, and get diarrhea. And she used to be on 1,500 milligrams with no symptoms. The last one I'll tell you very quickly, if I can, Elizabeth. Can I do it? The last one was when I was at West Virginia University Hospital in the consultation liaison service. And I was working with Judith Sedgman, that many of you know. And Judith and her daughter, who was really bright, 3 principles person, they had written a little thing called Less Stress and More Joy. I don't know if anybody's ever seen it. I might be able to get a copy to you. It's just a 2-page thing, Less Stress, More Joy. And if not, I'm sure Judith would be glad to send it to anybody, Judy Sedgman. But so this lady is in a manic episode. She came into the emergency room because her daughter brought her in saying that she was manic and needed to be, she had filed a petition for her to get, and they brought her to the emergency room and they found out that her sodium was really low, which can happen from Effexor and Prozac and those kind of drugs. Her sodium was so low they had to put her up on a medical unit. But she was in a manic state. I walked in. She was not in her gown. She was dressed to the hilt. She had makeup on. She had earrings. She looked like she was going to a ball. And as soon as I walked in the room, she started talking about 180 miles an hour. And it was hard for me to get a word in edgewise. And I got a emergency message that I had to go down to a hearing, to a legal hearing. And so I thought, gosh, I've got to leave her, but I'll come back. But I said to her, I said, can you stop talking long enough for me to just say something for a minute or so? She stopped. And I handed her this little thing that Judy Sedgman called Less Stress, More Joy. And I said, I'm going to come back. And I'm asking you to read this at least twice through. I know it's hard for you to concentrate right now, but will you please do that? I will be back within 2 and 2.5 hours. I have to go do this hearing. So I came back and I came in and she was sitting there quietly. And when she spoke at a normal speed. And she said, Doctor, that little thing you gave me to read, something happened. And I said, what do you mean? We'll call, I don't know, Mary. I said, well, she said, well, I suddenly had the realization that I had been making myself crazy, worrying about my grandson's drug problem. That all I've been thinking about for the last 10 days is worrying about his drug problem. And I see that I worried myself right into a very sick state. Well, she had her hearing that afternoon, and the judge didn't send her to the hospital because she was fine. Because she started to get a glimpse. Now, I forget whether we were able to enlist her in ongoing therapy or not, but just the power, that just the wisdom that Judy and her daughter Sarah's little two-sheet thing spoke to the fact that there was perfect mental well-being inside, and that we're creating our experience moment to moment from the inside out. Something struck her wisdom that stopped that manic episode in its tracks. That's not what the field thinks is possible, but it is possible.
Thank you so much, Bill. It's been, we're just going a little bit over, but I'd like to give Leela the chance to say anything she'd like to about tonight's evening, which has been quite extraordinary in terms of what's possible. Leela.
Yeah, I just I really enjoyed exploring, symptoms with such a different perspective, like talking about them as a gift. And the comment I made earlier about how the first instinct for people is to worry about them, but actually if you don't have that missing bit of understanding of what they point to. And I've just really, really, really enjoyed the exploration of just keep pointing back to, how that points to something helpful, not scary. And
Yes.
I really love the stories you shared.
Good.
I don't have any other comments really, other than that was just really kind of rich, and I got really still at the end. So thank you so much, Bill. Really, really, really appreciate your contribution. I think
Thank you, Lila.
this is I just feel like these are a real gift to the world. These podcasts, I really do. So I'm so glad that they are getting in the world now. So thank you very, very much. And Elizabeth, for all your hard work as well. So And
Yeah.
everybody for coming on, and really, we're getting more and more people every single time. So I really hope people are finding it interesting.
It's quite an amazing thing. And really what stuck out for me tonight is it's all because people are stuck in attention to their low mood thinking.
Yeah.
The simplicity of that.
Yeah.
And
you know, Sid used to say, in simplicity lies complexity, because in the simplicity of that, you see the complexity that gets created.
yeah, and never more clearer than in mental health diagnoses, how complex they can be, but it actually comes back to that very simple, the hopefulness of that. It's incredible.
Yeah, you don't have to have 400 solutions.
It's almost mind-blowing.
Almost mind-blowing.
Yeah.
That's why hopefully we will get a national and international dialogue going with people that are in places of power.
Well, the more we can create a conversation about this, the better. And this is all part of that. So thank you. I'm gonna say to everyone, it's good night. Let everybody unmute everyone, say good night. But thank you so much again.